Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, and welcome back to the T series. This is the latest in a long line of sessions that we have been doing to, in a very simple way, tackle some day to day thoughts and feelings that everybody has, not just new Muslims, but born Muslims too. And the topic of tonight is something called Taqdeer. Taqdeer. Trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even when you can't see the ending. My dear brothers and sisters, tonight I want to speak about something that every single person has struggled with at some point in their lives, and it's a subject that becomes especially important during times of hardship. It's easy to talk about faith when life is going well and everything's hunky dory. It's easy to speak about trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when our plans are succeeding and when we're winning and our health is strong and our families are safe and the future appears bright. But the true test of faith begins when life doesn't go the way that you would expect. The true test actually begins when the door that we wanted becomes closed, or when the opportunity that we were pursuing disappears, or when the diagnosis arrives from the doctor, or when the relationship ends, or the business fails, or when we found ourselves facing some reality that we never imagined or expected, like losing a loved one, for example. So those are the kind of moments that believers return to one of the most important concepts in our religion, which is taqdeer, the divine decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you could say the destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the greatest difficulties of being human is that we're living inside a timeline. We're living inside the story when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one that can see how the story is going to end. Your life story, you're the main character in your own life story, and you are living day to day, going through chapter by chapter, but you have no idea if in the end the good guys are going to win or not. You have no idea if in the end things are going to turn out okay or not. So every single one of us can see yesterday, we can see today, we can remember the successes and the failures and the lessons. We can remember the joys and the heartbreaks, but tomorrow is unknown. We don't know where our lives will be in 5 years or 10. We don't know which hardship will become a blessing and which blessing will become a test. We don't know which door Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is closing to protect us and which door He's opening or which door He's preparing to reopen in the future. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have this limited perspective. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the complete perspective of everything that's going to happen in the future too. He sees every conversation, every decision, every challenge, every outcome. What appears confusing to us is clear to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to us in the Qur'an, وَعَسَىٰ أَن تَكْرَهُوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ وَعَسَىٰ أَن تُحِبُّوا شَيْئًا وَهُوَ شَرٌّ لَكُمْ وَاللَّهُ يَعْلَمُ وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. This is one of the most sobering reminders that we can hear from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to all the human race, perhaps you dislike something, but it's good for you. And perhaps you love something, but it's bad for you. Allah knows and you do not know. Really, you cannot get more clear and concise than that, especially with the last little sentence. Allah is the one that knows. You don't know. The thing that you see is good and you're in love with it might be horrific for you. And the thing that you hate and it's so difficult to bring yourself to do it or to bear it might be the best thing for you. The simple fact is we do not know. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't tell us here that we're always going to understand. He doesn't promise that every test is going to immediately make sense. He doesn't promise that every hardship is going to come with some kind of detailed explanation, or even that you'll be able to open the Qur'an and find an explanation for what you're going through or feeling. Instead, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of a simple reality. Allah knows and you do not know. The challenge of faith is not trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala after everything makes sense. It's easy to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when you're winning. The challenge of faith is trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before things make sense. And especially when things seem very dark and it seems hopeless and it seems like there's no solution and there's no way out, that's what it really means to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we open the Qur'an and we study the lives of the prophets, we discover something remarkable. And it's all throughout the Qur'an, all throughout the lives of so many prophets and messengers. And I'll mention a couple of examples. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala presents us with stories in which His most beloved, His chosen servants are walking through circumstances that they don't understand. Today we know how the story ends. We can see the wisdom of what happened in the middle because we saw the conclusion. We can identify the lessons. But when they were living in those moments in real time, they didn't know what was coming next. They didn't know how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would solve the problem. And they didn't know how the story would conclude, but they trusted Him nonetheless. Take Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam as an example. We often think of Yusuf as the prophet who became a leader, the man whose dream was fulfilled, the one who was eventually reunited with his father after many decades apart. But when Yusuf was sitting at the bottom of the well, if you're not familiar with the story, his siblings threw him down a well because they were jealous of how much their father loved him. When he was sitting in the bottom of that well in the middle of the night, none of those things were visible. He didn't know that he would become some great financial leader of Egypt. He didn't know that he would be reunited with his father. We don't know. Maybe he was crying in the bottom of that well. Imagine being a young boy betrayed by your own brothers and watching the people you trusted most walk away while you remain trapped in the darkness. Imagine his confusion. Imagine his anger. Imagine the questions that must have been filling his mind. Why is this happening? What have I done to deserve this? Where is this heading? What's going to happen to me? If Yusuf alayhi salam had judged Allah's plan from the bottom of that well, he would have seen only pain. He would have seen only betrayal, only loss. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was already preparing a future for him much greater than even Yusuf himself could imagine. The well, of course, was not the end of the story. It was not even a setback. It was the beginning of a journey that would eventually place him in a position of influence and leadership. But the problem was he couldn't see it yet. The same lesson appears also in the story of Yusuf when he finds himself imprisoned. Now, this one is especially difficult because when he was thrown down the well, he hadn't done anything right or wrong, just his siblings were jealous of him. But imagine how easy it would have been for him to become discouraged. Yusuf had landed in prison because he resisted the temptations of the wife of Al-Aziz. She was trying to seduce him and he said no, so she had him thrown in jail. So he actually chose to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He chose to do the right thing, the honorable thing, the moral thing. He remained faithful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And from a human perspective, from our perspective, it appears that his righteousness had brought him trouble and hardship rather than ease. Because he made the right decision, he was thrown in jail. So once again, if he judged Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan from the prison cell, nothing would have made sense. I did the right thing, but why is Allah punishing me? Yet years later, it became clear that the prison was not an interruption to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's plan. It was part of the plan. That's the very place that seemed to be delaying his future was actually preparing him for that great future. Now, many of us can probably relate to this. We experience some kind of disappointment or tragedy or pain, and we immediately assume something is wrong. We lose an opportunity and we think that we've fallen behind somehow. We face a hardship and we conclude that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is withholding the goodness and the relief from us. But it could be, perhaps like Yusuf, that we're standing in the middle of a chapter whose purpose we cannot fully understand. Perhaps years later, we will look back at that difficult time and realize that what we thought was a setback was actually a big step forward. The same principles appears all through the Qur'an, not just in the story of Yusuf. For example, the story of Musa alayhi salam. The story begins with a terrified mother living under the rule of a tyrant, insane king who is killing all of the newborn boys. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inspires her to place her son, her infant son, in a basket and throw him into the river. Now, if you pause the story there, if we remove our knowledge of the ending and we place ourselves in her position, we immediately appreciate how extraordinary that command was. What mother would willingly place her baby and throw him in the river like that? What mother would feel calm watching the current take the baby away, not knowing, is there an animal going to eat him, or is he going to drown, or what's going to happen? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was teaching humanity a lesson that would remain with us even today. And it's not an easy one to wrap your mind around without practice. Sometimes the path to success doesn't look successful. Sometimes the solution appears to be more scary than the problem itself. Musa's mother did not know where the river was going to carry her son. And of course, the river carried her son directly into the Pharaoh's palace. The enemy that ordered the death of all those young boys, that's where it took him. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a miracle, a set of circumstances where he would be safe there and grow up there in luxury and royalty instead of being killed. She did not know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would return him to her. She did not know that her child, the child that she was releasing into the river, would one day become one of the greatest prophets who ever lived. But she trusted Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Years later, Prophet Musa himself, alayhi salam, he would face uncertainty. After he accidentally killed a man, he fled Egypt as a fugitive, fearing for his life. Imagine the fear, the uncertainty, the loneliness of that journey, running away from Egypt, fearing that he might be killed if he's arrested, and he had no detailed roadmap. He didn't know where he was going. He had no knowledge of what was ahead. He was not traveling toward prophethood because he didn't know yet that prophethood was waiting for him. He was just taking the next step, one day at a time. And while Musa alayhi salam believed he was running away from a crisis, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was leading him towards his destiny. The years that he spent in Madian, the work as a shepherd, the experience that he accumulated living in that harsh environment, instead of the luxurious environment of the palace with servants and maids and butlers, now he had to experience life in the open desert and toughen up so that he can go back and eventually face one of the greatest tyrants in history. And in one of the surahs of the Qur'an is called Surah Ash-Shu'ara, the chapter of the poets. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions a lot of the story of Musa in this chapter, as long as many other chapters. But there is a little mini story that actually happens in the story of Musa. That's also another example of the destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being surprising. And this is when there was a battle between the wizards of Fir'aun and Prophet Musa alayhi salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the story. He says, فَجُمِعَ السَّحَرَةَ لِمِيقَاتِ يَوْمٍ مَعْلُومٍ. And so the magicians were assembled on the appointed and specific day. This is a battle that Fir'aun had organized for his own wizards to have a duel against Musa alayhi salam. So this was Fir'aun trying to prove that he was the real God that everyone should worship, and that the God of Moses was nothing. So they decided to have this magical contest. وَقِيلَ لِلنَّاسِ هَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُجْتَمِعُونَ. And it was said to the people, will you gather to see, to witness this big public battle of magic? لَعَلَّنَا نَتَّبِعُ السَّحَرَةَ إِنْ كَانُوا هُمَ الْغَالِبِينَ. And the people in the crowd, they said, if the magicians win, we will follow the magicians. If the magicians win, we will follow the magicians and worship Pharaoh, because obviously he is the superior one. So when they all gathered, فَلَمَّا جَاءَ السَّحَرَةُ قَالُوا لِفِرْعَوْنَ أَإِنَّا لَنَا أَجْرًا إِن كُنَّا نَحْنُ الْغَالِبِينَ. So the wizards, before the battle took place, the wizards, they went to Pharaoh and they said, "Oh Fir'aun, are we going to have some kind of reward if we win?" And Fir'aun, he said, "Yes, of course. If you win, then I will make you of the closest people to me. I'm going to bring you in so close to my money and to my power and to my luxury. I'll take really good care of you. Only if you win." قال لهم موسى ألقوا ما أنتم ملقون. So Musa said to them, "Go ahead and cast. Do whatever spells you want to do." فألقوا حبالهم وعصيهم وقالوا بعزة فرعون إنا نحن الغالبون. So they cast their staffs and their ropes. They threw them onto the ground and they said, "By the glory of Fir'aun, we will win." And their staffs and their ropes turned into snakes. They created the illusion that their staffs and their ropes turned into snakes. فَأَلْقَى مُوسَى عَصَاهُ. So Moses threw his staff. فَإِذَا هِيَ تَلْقَفُ مَا يَأْفِكُونَ. So Moses threw his staff. And Moses' staff turned into a real snake. The other magicians, their staffs and their ropes created the illusion of a snake. They didn't become real snakes. They didn't become real living things because magic doesn't work that way. But the staff of Moses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created a miracle that it turned into an actual honest to goodness snake, a living, breathing snake. And the snake of Moses ate all of the snakes, so-called snakes, of the wizards. Now, the wizards, they had studied magic all of their lives to be able to get to this level of skill. They were the top wizards in all of Egypt. So after seeing what they just saw, they knew that this is not magic. They knew that this is not something anyone can do. They were already the top educated wizards in Egypt. They were the cream of the crop. And once they saw that, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ. So all of the wizards fell down into sujood, making sujood, prostrating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قَالُوا آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. They said, "We believe in the Lord of the heavens and the earth, رَبِّ مُوسَى وَهَارُونَ, the Lord of Moses and Aaron." Oh my God. Now this was exactly like Sayyidina Yusuf, Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, choosing the right character and the moral character and then facing punishment and jail. They did the right thing. As soon as they witnessed a real honest to God miracle, they believed it. They made sujood. They accepted Islam on the spot. They said, "We believe in the Lord of the worlds. We believe in the Lord of Moses and Aaron." When just 5 minutes ago, they were saying, "By the glory of Fir'aun, we are the ones that are going to win." So obviously, this was a big public humiliation for Fir'aun. And remember, there are crowds of people gathering to watch. So Pharaoh was angry, to say the least. قَالَ آمَنْتُ لَهُ قَبْلَ أَنْ آذَنَ لَكُمْ. He said to the wizards, "Are you believing in him before I have given you permission to do so? إِنَّهُ لَكَبِيرُكُمُ الَّذِي عَلَّمَكُمُ السِّحْرَ فَلَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ." It turns out, I'm guessing that Moses is the head of the wizards. Moses is the one who is your teacher. Moses is the one who's a bigger wizard than all of you, and you are all his students. And you have all orchestrated this day just to humiliate me. فَلَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. So I'm going to show you. لَأُقَطِّعَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ مِنْ خِلَافٍ وَلَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. I'm going to cut off your arm and cut off your leg from the opposite side. And then I'm going to crucify you. I'm going to nail you to a cross where everyone can see you and watch you die there, but only after I chop off one arm and one leg from the opposite side. So what did the magicians say when they basically are just being told that they're going to be tortured and executed? قَالُوا لَا ضَيْرٍ. They said, "We do not care. إِنَّا إِلَىٰ رَبِّنَا مُنْقَلِبُونَ. We are going to return to our Lord. إِنَّا نَطْمَعُ أَنْ يَغْفِرَ لَنَا رَبَّنَا خَطَايَانَا أَنْ كُنَّا أَوَّلَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ." They said, "We are not bothered. We are going to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive our sins because we were the first to believe from the people of Egypt." So at that stage in the story, the wizards, they did not see any positive outcome yet for their choosing to do the right thing. They literally being told, in the public square in front of the whole town that they're going to be amputated and crucified and killed on display for everyone to see. And they said, that's okay, so long as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives us. Subhanallah. Now, perhaps one of the most moving examples of this taqdeer is the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And we just celebrated Eid al-Adha, remembering this story. Imagine longing for a child for years and years and decades. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was not able to have children. And he lived until old age without having any children. So that means he saw his friends having children. He visited his friends and his friends visited him when their kids were infants, when their kids were toddlers, when their kids were primary school age, high school age. And then he saw those same children that he saw as babies finally grow into adults. And all the time he had a hole in his heart, wishing and hoping that one day he would have a son. And as he got older and older, the hope of having this son, it sort of dwindled. Then, as you guys know the story, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed him and his wife with sons at a very old age, an age so old that nobody could believe that someone this old could have children. Then comes the test that still amazes believers all these thousands of years later. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Ibrahim alayhi salam to sacrifice that very son that he waited so long to receive. Today we know how the story ends. You and I know how it ends. We know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded them to stop before the sacrifice took place, and he sent a ram to slaughter the ram instead. We know that Ismail would survive, and we know that the sacrifice would not ultimately take place. But Ibrahim did not know that. When he was commanded to kill your son, he did not know that it was just a test. He thought he really had to do it. And as he prepared to carry out Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's command, he didn't have the benefit of knowing how the story ends like you and me. He only had trust. He probably couldn't see how anything good could come out of this except obedience to Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had other plans. This is one of the greatest tests of taqdeer. Faith is not trusting Allah after the outcome becomes clear. Faith is trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before the outcome becomes clear. When all the world is dark, you still trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When there seems to be no way out, you still trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were to reveal every detail of the future to us, trust would no longer be necessary. The beauty of faith lies in surrendering ourselves to the one who sees what we cannot see. This lesson becomes even more clear with the story of Musa and Qadr. Now, Musa is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so nobody's going to question his faith or his trust. Musa accompanies Qadr and witnesses Qadr committing a series of crimes. If you're not familiar with the story, Qadr says to him, you can accompany me and learn from me, but you're not allowed to ask me about anything until I come to you and explain it to you. You're not allowed to ask questions. You just follow along and observe. And when I feel like teaching you something, I'll teach you. And Musa agrees. Qadr goes and he smashes a boat for no reason. Qadr sees a young man and he kills him for no reason. And Musa alayhi salam loses patience. He says, what have you done? Why are you destroying this boat? Why have you killed this boy? And Qadr says to him in the end of the story, now we go our separate ways. But before we go our separate ways, because you're asking too many questions, I will explain to you the wisdom behind what I did. Only at the end, Qadr explains that what he was doing was actually the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there was good reason behind it. He damaged the boat to protect the owners of the boat from an unjust king who was seizing all the boats by force. So he broke the boat on purpose so that when the king would come and see, he would see the boat is broken and he would not confiscate it. The death of the boy prevented future harm to his righteous parents. This boy was going to grow up to be a crook, a monster. And the parents were righteous believers. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to end this boy's life and give them a righteous son in the future. But of course, like we said, the parents being in the middle of the story, they did not know that. They did not know that that was an evil boy. They did not know that Allah would give them a righteous son in the future. They probably just said, our son got murdered, and that's all. Qadr also repaired a wall. The wall was going to break of someone's house, and he went and fixed it, even though they didn't even have money to eat. Sayyidina Musa said to him, why did you fix that wall for free? We could have charged them some money, and then we could have had some money to eat. And Qadr explained to him that he fixed that wall because there was orphans living in that house, and their parents had buried for them a treasure underneath this wall. And if the wall collapses now, the people of the town would swindle the orphans and take the fortune from them. So he repaired the wall so that the wall would remain upright for another few years or decades until the boys would become men. Then the wall would collapse. Then as grown men, they could decide what they wanted to do with that treasure. So actually 2 out of the 3 stories was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doing something good for righteous parents. Because the parents were righteous, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did something to the children. And that's a lesson for all of us parents. If you want righteous children, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect your children later in life, you must be righteous parents. This story teaches us something profound about our own lives. We are often like Musa. And remember, Musa is not nobody. Musa is one of the best human beings who ever lived. But he didn't have the patience. He kept asking Qadr, why did you do this? Why did you do that? But we need to have patience. So we don't know the end of the story. We witness events without seeing the full picture. We experience the hardship without understanding its purpose. We encounter delays without understanding their benefit. And we're judging chapter 3 while Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is writing chapter 20. We are demanding the explanation while the story is still unfolding. Now, one of the biggest comforts before we wrap up tonight is what the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ told us. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, وَعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَا أَخْطَأَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُصِيبَكَ وَمَا أَصَابَكَ لَمْ يَكُنْ لِيُخْطِئَكَ. Know that what has missed you was never going to reach you. And what has reached you was never going to miss you. That means that whatever is happening was meant to happen just that way. If we truly understood and appreciated this hadith, a lot of our anxiety would disappear. We would stop saying, why did this happen? If only I had done this. If only I had done that. Actually, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he warned us against this statement, if only, because he said it opens the door to shaitan. We should never look at the past and say, if only I did this, if only I did that. I wish I did this, I wish I did that. This is wrong. Because what happened was meant to happen that way and could not have happened any other way. It's the destiny of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Instead, you can say, next time I will do such and such. But you can't say, in the past I should have done such and such. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is teaching us what Allah decreed for us was always going to reach us. And there is a famous saying, some people say it was said by Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu, some people say it was Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, اطمئن قلبي أن رزقي لم يأخذه غيري فعلمت أن رزقي سيأتيني ولو كان تحت جبلين. My heart is at peace knowing that what was meant for me will never be taken by anyone else. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written something for me, nobody else is going to get it. And what was written for me is going to reach me even if it is buried underneath 2 mountains. Not 1 mountain, 2 mountains. That means even if it seems impossible for me to get it, if Allah has written it for me, then I'm definitely going to get it. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ also said, عَجَبًا لِأَمْرِ الْمُؤْمِنِ. How amazing is the situation of a believer. إِنَّ أَمْرَهُ كُلَّهُ خَيْرٌ. All of his affairs are good. If something bad happens to him, he's patient, and that's good for him. He will get the reward for his patience. If something good happens to him, he's grateful, and he will get the reward for his gratitude. So, in any situation, positive or negative, you have the opportunity to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says in the Qur'an, in Surah Yasin, listen to this carefully. He says, وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا, and the sun runs to its appointed course. The sun follows the route that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has planned for it. وَالشَّمْسُ تَجْرِي لِمُسْتَقَرٍ لَهَا ذَلِكَ تَقْدِيرُ الْعَزِيزِ الْعَلِيمِ. That is the decree of Al-Aziz, Al-Alim. Al-Aziz and Al-Alim are two of the names, two of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if I translate this, it says, and the sun moves along its fixed course. Such is the determination of the Almighty and the All-Knowing. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about His decree, even for the sun, even for the planets, even for the galaxies, as well as for your life and my life, He says this is the decree of Al-Aziz, Al-Alim. Al-Aziz can mean the one who possesses all might, power, and authority. And Al-Alim means the one who knows the past, the present, and the future. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, my decision to put the sun on this course is coming from the possessor of all might, power, and authority, and the one who knows all past, present, and future. Which is kind of a nice way of saying, so don't question it and don't argue with it. Whatever the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happens to be, whether it's the path of the sun or the path of your life or my life. You and I are no different. We are living inside our own story, and we cannot see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees. We don't know what He's preparing for us. We don't know how this hardship is shaping us, and which delay is protecting us, or which disappointment is redirecting us towards something better. But we know for sure the one who is writing the story, and we know that He is Ar-Rahman, the most merciful, Al-Hakim, the most wise, Al-Latif, the most gentle, and we know that He's more merciful to us than of ourselves. The same Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who took care of Yusuf is taking care of you. The same Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who guided Musa is guiding you. The same Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who protected Ibrahim, He is protecting you. And the same Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who knew the ending of these stories knows the ending of your story. So trust Him. When the road is clear, trust Him. When the road is dark, trust Him just the same. Trusting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the answer, even when we cannot see what is beyond our current circumstances. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has never lost control of His creation, and He has not lost control of your life either. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us among those who are content with His decree, patient during hardship, grateful during ease, and steadfast on His path until we meet Him. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with certainty, tranquility, and trust, and may He allow us to see the wisdom of His decree in this life and the next. Allahumma ameen.